Ethiopia and Eritrea have signed an historic peace agreement for two nations who have been on high alert and in a state of no war, no peace for over 2 decades. The regional shift could be seismic, and few expected this level of change and at such a rapid pace, despite the new Ethiopian premier signifying a thawing of relations since taking office a few months ago. And as well as extending the diplomatic hand of friendship to Eritrea, Addis Ababa has lifted the state of emergency, said they would free political prisoners, and announced economic reforms. But there have been false dawns before, but never after such public overtures is real peace breaking out between Ethiopia and Eritrea.
It was a day many Ethiopians and Eritreans thought they would never live to witness. Their leaders warmly embracing as a lasting peace between once warring nations seems finally possible. With Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed officially signing the peace treaty with his counterpart, Eritrean President Isaias Afwerki, citizens from both countries began plans for a reconciliation 2 decades in the making. For a population that's grown conflict-wary, the new move towards peace has been a welcomed one, with even international voices joining the chorus of approval.
There is a wind blowing that brings us new hope. What has happened in relation to Eritrea and Ethiopia, and especially the absolutely amazing reception that the people of Eritrea just expressed in relation to the Ethiopian Prime Minister in the visit of yesterday, showing the deep will of the people for peace.
Despite the optimism, there are still many hurdles to overcome. Are Ethiopia and Eritrea up to this new challenge?
Welcome to Africa Today on Press TV. My name is Amina Taylor, and thank you for being with us. Is it a new dawn for the people of Eritrea and Ethiopia? Well, the early signs are promising after both leaders signed off on a peace deal that would see Asmara and Addis Ababa normalize relations after decades at loggerheads. But still, despite the optimism, details are still emerging about how this new-look diplomatic warmth will play out. My special guests are the member of the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Party, Bekele Teklu, and alongside him, Eritrean human rights activist Salam Kedani. Good to have you both. Let me kick things off with you, Salam. Are you feeling optimistic about this new entente cordiale between the two nations?
Cautiously optimistic. I mean, it was fantastic. It was amazing. It's not every day as an Eritrean you wake up and see peace breaking. So it was a surprise when the Prime Minister announced it. It was more of a surprise when Isaias Afwerki accepted it and sent a delegation to Addis, and it just keeps on surprising us more and more, and so I am cautiously optimistic. As you said, there is still quite a lot of details to be worked out. This is not a standoff of a few days or a few months. This has been going on for 2 decades, and it has costed quite a lot of lives. It has caused quite a lot of misery. So there's still quite a lot to do. As seismic as those events the detail is still to emerge, and the hardest part is still to come, I think.
We've had the photo opportunities, we've had the warm embraces, we've had the positive words, Bekele. How did you greet this announcement and then the signing of the agreement?
Basically, I mean, there is no that much deep problem between the two people. I mean, the two people share a lot, a common history. They share religion, culture, and a lot. Still, if you see more Eritrean Ethiopians outside Ethiopia, they are entertaining in the same restaurants, they have that get-together, and so on. So basically, there is no problem between the two people. The problem is the politician, rather the leaders. Now, if we remember, in 1991, when Mallas and Isaias were friends, and everybody was hoped that peace prevailed, no more war, and so on. But in few years' time, it happened, and it cost 100,000 people and more than £4 billion. Generally, peace, as it is, everybody needs it, especially the people, because they are the one who suffers more. But how it's hard to be optimist in that regard, because there are different players within this peace. There are people who do not want this peace to happen.
Of course, because this state of no peace, no war has been beneficial to certain sections of both Eritrean and Ethiopian society, Selam.
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak for mostly for Eritrea, and because we have no war, no peace, because we've been on a war footing for so long, Eritrea has managed to keep hundreds of thousands of young people in the national service indefinitely.
Yeah, this was conscription.
This was conscription
rolling,
indefinitely. Yes. The constitution that was ratified in 1997 was put on hold in 1998 because we went to war, and it has been in that status ever since. So we don't have a working constitution, although it was ratified. We've got thousands of prisoners, people who have asked for accountability as a result of the 1998 war are still in prison today. Ministers, we don't have any free press. We don't have a single newspaper. We don't have a single radio station that is not owned by the government. And all of this is because we were supposed to be in war. And if this is now peace, then all of these things have to be put in place, and that could mean an end to the ruling party, the PFDJ.
Of course, some would say, Bekele, it's almost like a turkey voting for Christmas here, when you know the very thing that you have begun, that process, could mean you're no longer useful, you're no longer viable. How is it on the Ethiopian side? Because here you are, a new prime minister, full of energy, and who studied conflict resolution and is putting that into practice.
I mean, in the first place, this peace never happened in all of a sudden, as some said. It has been long in its making. For instance, the World Council of Church, they were in Eritrea in September before the Ethiopian Prime Minister came into power, and the Saudis and Emirates, and they were offering money to Isaias, and there were unofficial, but there were people-to-people conference and those sort of things going on in Ethiopia.
So back-channel conversations.
Yes. And the West and the Middle East, especially Saudi and Emirates, were all behind that all. But this is not happening all of a sudden. I mean, there was a process to come toward this year. But there was an opportunity because the Tigrayan hardliners were weak relatively in terms of because Isaias and the Tigray hardliners are confronting each other, they hate each other too much. So at this moment, because they are, sometimes it's hugging, smiling, not putting any preconditions, and are political, has, that political message to the hardliners as well. So, entirely, but at the same time, this will have another consequence, because
and what might that other consequence be?
Because the Tigray hardliners, they have patronage of networks deep rooted into ethnic demographies.
So they are not just going to simply step aside and let it
exactly
happen. Is that the same in Eritrea, where there have been such entrenched positions that it's very difficult now for some people to roll back from that position with dignity and their position still intact?
I think that's almost impossible in Eritrea because unlike Ethiopia, Eritrea is a much smaller country, and also unlike Ethiopia, there aren't any political parties, there aren't any strong and entrenched positions except for the president himself and his party, and his party is getting smaller because a lot of people have gone into prison, into exile, and have been sidelined. So it is really what we are talking about is the president and his position here. And I agree with Bekele on the confrontation with some of the hardliners within with his counterparts in TPLF, who have got a lot of shared history during the independence struggle and immediately after the independence struggle. And so the conflict really is there at that point. And the rest of Ethiopia and the rest of Eritrea, we have been kind of almost a collateral to that. And I think if peace is going to happen, I think the reconciliation and also the give and take has to happen there between the Tigrayan hardliners and President Isaias Afwerki. And that's the hard part, as far as I think. So far, we have seen a lot of announcements, a lot of goodwill being shared, a lot of open kissing and hugging, and which is nice to see, which is something very refreshing for the world to observe as well, which is so good for the new generation to see as well. So healing in that sense. But to effect this, it will need to go on, and it will need to hit at the heart of the conflict. Otherwise, we will be back at this point again, because we were at this point before 1998. We have been at this point. President Isaias and Prime Minister Meles Zenawi, the late Prime Minister Meles Zenawi, were actually heralded as the Renaissance leaders of Africa before the war in 1998. Nobody anticipated, nobody expected that would happen to Eritrea.
I'm going to come back to you in a moment there, just to discuss some of the obstacles that still remain in the way from both sides. But let me just take you now to our social media pages and our Facebook address. We'll be scrolling along on your screens there for you to get in touch and join the conversation for a future show. But let me just bring in a message here from Jordanos, who is Eritrean but living in Milan, Italy at the moment. And I'm just going to take a couple of excerpts from what is a rather long piece of correspondence. She said, the TPLF minority regime, that's the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front in Ethiopia, was the problem. They put in place various measures to weaken and isolate Eritrea while sabotaging peace. In fact, the border conflict was never about the border, and the no war, no peace situation was the direct result of Ethiopia's refusal to abide by the international border ruling and proceed with demarcation since 2002. And then she wraps it up by saying, finally, the new leadership in Ethiopia seems to realize that peace is a win-win situation for both countries, as there's nothing we will achieve with conflict. So many domestic and regional developments could happen with peace and cooperation. Hopefully this is the beginning of a new phase for the Horn as a whole. And get in touch with the conversation there on our Facebook page. Let me just bring this to Bekele. We heard a little bit here about apportioning blame for this. Is there a sense in Ethiopia that they needed to extend the olive branch first before the Eritrean leadership could take them seriously?
Probably yes, because basically now even Isaias is happy. He didn't put any preconditions and he accepts. But when it's come on the ground, what is going to happen to the military? The military presently in that area are the, by the way, 97% of the military generals and more than 65% of all the officers in the Ethiopian armies are from ethnic Tigrayans, which are loyal to TPLF. And how even recently through the Tigray radio, will never move our military. That was what they clearly said. Do you think that Isaias will agree with the presence of that military to give up anything? That is a question. Two, what about the people who are living there? There are communities that are split into two. Unless there is a special case, how are they going to handle this? Three, for Prime Minister Abiy himself, he has problem within Ethiopia. There are conflicts, there are fires, and there are businessmen, because basically Prime Minister Abiy is now within that EPRDF structure. And the TPLF hardliners are coming through the same structure. Unless that structure dismantled, unless there is all-inclusive transitional
then there are going to be problematic issues. But we're looking here at a prime minister who's young, he's dynamic, he has ideas, he studied conflict resolution. This is right up his street, surely, Silla?
Yeah, I mean, this piece has got a lot going for it. The people are up for it. Yes, as you said, there's a prime minister that can make it happen. And also, don't forget, the international community is also for it. Europe wants it to happen because thousands of Eritrean refugees are drowning in the sea, or in Libya's TAC, or in Calais and other places seeking asylum. This is an untenable position. The number of people leaving Eritrea, the slow death of Eritreans inside Eritrea, that is something that has become an international problem.
But it hasn't worked out that well for Ethiopia economically either. I mean, we're talking about having to invest in the port in Berbera to try and make sure there's port access. We're talking about Djibouti as a way to get goods in, because your main route used to be with your neighbors, and that was blocked. That's $1 billion loss annually.
For Ethiopia and for Eritrea as well. So peace, if there is a situation, a democratic situation in both countries, yeah, if all-inclusive government is established in Ethiopia, it could be PM Abiy, the head of that, but without marginalizing other stakeholders in Ethiopia. The same is true in Eritrea. If that is the case, people love each other always. People want to deal with each other. No problem within people. Only few players who benefit out of chaos, rather, try to create all these sort of problems.
So who are the regional actors in this for you, in terms of neighbors in the Horn of Africa, who might have a stake in ensuring this goes through, that it happens?
I mean, the biggest players in the Horn of Africa are obviously Eritrea and Ethiopia. Sudan and Djibouti can play good allies. Somalia, unfortunately, is too weak to have a say in that. I mean, Djibouti, as you said, has been benefiting from the situation, and I don't know how supportive Djibouti would. We hope everybody will gain from peace. But, further afield, there's a lot of goodwill for this to happen because there has been a lot of suffering. That war costed over 100,000 people, and then the economic and social and political backlash has been ongoing for 20 years. So it needs to stop. We need to move on. And I think the main stakeholders are the people of Eritrea and Ethiopia, the young people of Eritrea and Ethiopia. And I think for peace to happen, yes, political change will also need to happen. It cannot only be about the economic advantage one way or another. It cannot be about stakeholders outside the two nations. It
but
needs
allow
to
me
be
to
about
put
the
this
people.
to you. If you've lost family, if your community had been uprooted by all of this, first to you, Bekele, surely it's very difficult to forgive and move on and look to the future here when you're thinking, okay, is there restitution? Is there compensation? How do we move on with just rhetoric and words?
I mean, as I have tried to explain before, the first thing is people need to be free. Some people might die in Bademe, yet their daughters or brothers might be imprisoned in Ethiopia. By the way, prisoners are released in Ethiopia, but there are thousands of prisoners still languishing in Ethiopia. In Eritrea, the same thing. So they need to harmonize all this sort of problem first. It's not all of a sudden, we are friends, just everything is sorted. But to come back to the players, regional players, I mean, the most important players are the USA and Saudi and Emirates, because Chinese are now economically dominating the area. But, USA wants to restore its own domination in that area.
And so, Ethiopia has been helping with that, to be fair.
Yeah, but it couldn't, because with the Ethiopian government, they are always coming to USA and back to China and so on. They were playing a game, and they were not happy, the USA, with their game. On top of that, because always the USA needs a relatively stable government. They need. When governments are not stable, they will try to find someone who could replace them. This is obvious. So those are also the players now, you know. But in the two governments need to focus on their people first. As you mentioned earlier, people are, 80,000, 100,000 of people are, lost their life. A number of people, lost their property and so on. With all these problems, the first thing is to go on the ground, talk to the people who just suffer all this problem and harmonize things.
But you can't undo 20 years of suffering, surely, Silla?
Well, I mean, the people of Asmara surprised us by the way they welcomed peace. I mean, although it came in the shape of the prime minister, I believe people were welcoming peace. So,
or was that more they were just tired of the state of war?
They are tired of the state of conflict. They are tired, but they are welcoming peace. There's nothing worse than the situation we've been in Eritrea, with every young person from the age of 17, 18 going into the military service, and if they don't leave the country, they stay in that military service. There are people who've been serving since 1997, 98, and people need to come back home. Things need to start to become normal again.
What would convince you that this is genuine, heartfelt, and will be moving forward in a positive fashion?
The first sign for me will be the end of the indefinite national service. If these young people come back home, then I would say, yes, peace is happening. Peace is finally here.
What about you, Bekele?
Yes, before that, she mentioned that the Eritrean people are happy. Yes, most Ethiopians are. But we do not need to forget that there were protests in Badme area as well. Mm-hmm. There are people who welcome this peace deal, and at the same time, there are people who are on the ground who were protesting. Because, as I mentioned, because communities could be split and so on. So this need to be sorted out first.
Of course.
And we'll be monitoring that situation. I hope to have both of you back on the program when that happens. And that's all the time we have for this show. As always, we welcome you carrying on that discussion on our social media pages. Bekele Teklu and Selam Kedani were my special guest. And thank you for being with us, and hope to have the pleasure of your company for another edition of Africa Today. I've been Amina Taylor. Stay tuned to Press TV.